This video will cover how I built a concrete hearth that sits below a gas fireplace in our living room. Please check out my website for a full written tutorial on this project. The beauty of working with concrete is you can really make the mold any shape you want. Here you can see my fireplace sits at a 45-degree angle, so I can make a mold to accommodate that. The finished product is really a facade, so you can see it's only 2 inches thick. The project starts by beginning a mold. I begin by doing all my rough cuts out of 3/4 inch melamine. This is just scrap that I had laying around. And I use a miter saw to cut the tricky little angle bits that sit on the end of the mold. Glue is really optional for a mold this small, but I use brad nails to tack everything in and hold it in place. Here you can see the angled pieces on the end, which will allow the hearth to sit nicely into a corner. Pre-drill your holes and use drywall screws to hold the rest of the mold together. It can be a good idea to cover your screw heads with tape or plasticine. This will help from concrete getting into the screw heads and will help you release your mold. Apply black caulking to the inside seams to make the mold watertight. I use black caulking so that I can just see it better. I cut a 5-degree bevel on both sides of the mounting board, which will be in our final product. This will help us mount the hearth. Then I used a brad nailer to tack on some scrap 2x4 to help it from falling into the mold when we're pouring concrete. I used some old coat hangers to create rebar. I started by lightly fastening some screws that the rebar can be mounted to, and used hot glue to tack it in place. In the end, your rebar should be floating and not touching the edges of your mold. With a mold this small, you can really mix the concrete by hand. To fill this mold, I only needed 2/3 of a $5 bag of concrete. I also put in some dark gray coloring that I had lying around. That really didn't make that much of a difference in the color. The goal for mixing concrete is to add as little water as possible while still maintaining a nice flowing concrete. This is where super plasticizers or high-range water reducers can be handy. The use of them in this mold is a little overkill, but I encourage you to read up on them as they're quite fascinating. Pour and work the concrete into the mold. And set the mounting board with the rebar attached into the mold. Immediately work the bubbles out of the concrete using a palm sander without sandpaper on it. Give your concrete at least 4 days to cure before releasing the mold. After releasing the mold, if you want a nice uniform look, you can leave it here. If you want to expose some aggregates, you're going to need to polish it. I use a random orbit polisher with diamond pads. I like to start with 1000 grit and work my way down until I can see the exposed aggregate. Be sure to apply lots of water to keep your pads cool and keep the surface visible. And whatever grit you started with, you're going to work your way back up to a nice fine grit. After the water is completely dried, now's a good time to put on your finish or your polyurethane. I didn't really have that luxury on this project because I had to install it right away. I did this by clamping it to the fireplace framing and fastening it from behind in the mounting board we provided for earlier. I then put on 3 coats of high gloss polyurethane. I was sure to put it on very lightly because now it's mounted and it's vertical, so it's prone to dripping. If you do get a little bit of dripping or streaking, you can sand it down with 220 grit sandpaper and apply the next coat. And here's the final product. As you can see, I ended up reflooring underneath the hearth. Thanks for sticking around. Please subscribe to see more videos like this.